The Book of Ecclesiastes. It is better to go to a house of mourning than go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Okay, so hi everybody, this is Christian RPG Gamers. So the background footage for this is from it's called Gwent Mobile. I was just doing some kind of a draft. Honestly, I feel like I'm terrible at this game. I don't know a better way to put it, especially at the drafts. But you know, I have some fun sometimes. So okay, so for today's video, I want to talk about from Netflix. It's called Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's a live-action adaptation from, I believe it's an anime, or it might be called a cartoon. So, or based off of the cartoon or the anime. I mean, I was talking to G Scotty. He's a YouTuber out there. Go check him out if you like him. It's called G Scotty, and he was talking about I asked him about it, and he said it's called I think he called it a cartoon. Although I'm not sure the exact difference between a cartoon and an anime. Okay, so I want to write a little bit of a Christian perspective, and it's also just like a bit of a review. So, okay, I guess I'll lay out a couple points down. So, I think if I watched the whole series, I think it was last week, so I have a little bit of time to digest it. I've seen the Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Korra. Korra, it's called like The Legend of Korra. I think I've pretty much watched them 2 separate times each. And to be real with somebody, they're also just really good. The Legend of Korra is a little bit shady, but that's a whole separate matter. But overall, I do really like and enjoy it. And about this live action series they made, I'm just gonna say this. I did really like it. I had a pretty high disposition at the end of the day. Okay, so I wrote some notes. I'll probably just go through some of the notes. At least it gives me a little bit of a guideline, and then we'll see what happens and goes from there. Okay, so I guess one of the things I'll say is, I say yes, I do recommend it. So when I'm working on these little reviews, or kind of like a Christian review, I try to write something more positive. I think it's called like more mixed or neutral, then more negative. I think the reason I call it mixed is because I don't want to have the letter N and the letter N 2 separate times. And it keeps them a little bit separate, but okay. And I'm gonna be real with somebody. I actually had a pretty hard time coming up with some bad stuff about it. Again, sometimes when it comes to shows, obviously there's things that just sometimes you just really don't like about it. Honestly speaking, I had a really hard time coming up with things I didn't like about it. But there are a couple, maybe slightly controversial, but okay, so I'll start with the positive. I think the positive about this, I think it's like an 8-episode TV show series. Positive is that it's extremely faithful and loyal to the canon and to the lore of the anime, or it's called the cartoon. It's very, very faithful. So that's a massive positive. And most of the time it was, from what I can tell, although maybe I was wrong, it is almost a just direct, literal 1-for-1 from the actual cartoon. Adjusted a little bit, and they had to make some cuts, obviously. But it's like an almost 1-for-1. I would say for my mixed or my neutral disposition about this, so one criticism I could come up with is for some of the characters and for some of the world aspects, the chemistry just didn't feel very good sometimes. Or I think I wrote down the chemistry wasn't cohesive. So for my other example, since I kind of watched them one after the other, I made a video. At some point I'll probably have them both up from the Witcher television show from Netflix. Yeah, I was just watching. I paid for Netflix. I paid for Netflix for a month, so I watched a couple series on it. On The Witcher, a lot of the characters felt, again, like that show, it has its issues, right? But the chemistry was really good between the characters. Like there's Yennefer and Geralt, they felt like really like they clicked. And a lot of the characters in that story or in that world, they felt like they were very natural and they clicked together like good chemistry. And in this series, I'm gonna be honest with somebody. I felt like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, certain pairs of characters, they clicked well with chemistry, but a lot of the characters, they just didn't feel like right. They didn't work. I mean, the characters didn't work good with the other characters sometimes. So it just didn't. And some of the characters, I mean, I'm not saying I had a problem with the characters, just maybe the actors or whatever. They didn't click very well together sometimes, which is subjective, but it's just kind of what my mixed disposition. So something negative. Okay, so I guess this is kind of like something negative about it. Now, I guess this is obviously subjective. Now, obviously, as a Christian, I mean, we should preach, right? It felt sometimes like they were very preachy, and not like in a bad way. They weren't trying to push some like agenda or something. They just felt like they were, they were preachy about stuff like how they were going to try to save the world, how they're going to fulfill their destiny or something. And it's one of those things where it's like, it kind of felt like they were just. It's not a bad thing to be like, obviously preaching is a good thing, but it felt like they were pushing this idea of like good versus evil, and about how like they were the good guys and they were gonna like, or I'm not sure exactly how to put it, but something about how they had like their destiny or their fate or their like this like lawful order, and about how it's like their responsibility. And maybe I haven't watched the anime in a while. I've seen it 2 separate times. Honestly, I think I even watched it when I was a child once, when I was on like Nickelodeon or something. Although when I was younger, I had no understanding like at all, but I didn't care at all then. But I've seen the series before. When I watched the anime, now I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've watched it. It didn't feel like it was really that preachy to me. Now it could have been, but it felt like they were just very preachy in the live action, like very overtly. And I feel like if you want to preach a message, what you really probably should do instead is you should show your preaching of your message more than sit there and tell you. And again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I mean, obviously as a Christian we should preach, but when you're watching like a live action show or something, it just kind of felt like they were just overly like in your face about some stuff. And these aren't like controversial issues. It's just one of my negative dispositions towards it. Okay. Now, I mean, that's the subjective at the end of the day, but okay. So I guess some of the other points that I wrote down. So obviously it has great storytelling. And it also, I wrote down, it also plus lots to learn about being human, growing up, and then like / maturing. So I think one aspect of the series is it's very good for like teenagers and like children or even young adults. And to be honest, there's a certain point where really just any human being in general, it's kind of just like the idea of growing up, learning how to grow up and be an adult, and accepting a level of personal responsibility for your life and for your actions, and kind of learning how to, like, learning that you're a child, but you need to slowly learn to just, become more of an adult and let some of your childish things go. And I think this is one good, it's like a message in it, right? And this is like one aspect of the anime. And honestly, the live action was almost a one-for-one, identical to the anime or the cartoon or whatever it's supposed to be called. So there is that. So another thing, I'm just gonna go through some of the points that I wrote down. I feel like it gives a little bit of structure to the video. Let's see here, how far am I at currently? Barely see this thing's like 11 minutes. Oh yeah, I know this thing. It sometimes makes some terrible like noise when I touch it, or it doesn't record very good. My systems aren't always the best, but I just make do with the best I can do. And that's probably honestly a thing about Netflix. Okay, I guess that's actually just a great point. I felt like this series, they did the best they could do with what they were given, and they did a great job. Now I don't know the budget they had. It felt like, I guess one thing I'll talk about from the series, right? It felt like they did a really good job, and I never really questioned like really almost anything about it, like the authenticity and stuff, because it felt like they went out of their way to do the best possible job they could. So I guess I'll go through my notes here in a second, but I kind of just thinking about this. So initially when I started watching the live action show, I was a little bit sketchy about some of the characters and how they were going to be portrayed, and whether I was going to like them or not. And I was a little bit questioning whether they're going to, what they were going to do or not do. So they had, I gotta think of some of the names. There was Katara, and I think his name's barely remember. Is Suko? Well, okay. There was the. I gotta think of the names here. Okay, I just need to remember some of his name. Okay, so his name's Suko. So it's Suko. I got that name right. Well, Sokka. That's okay. Sorry, I'm looking up here. Oh, Sokka and Katara. Sorry, I don't know why my brain just couldn't remember his name for a minute. Sokka and Katara, and then there's Aang, and then there's like Fire Lord Zuko, and then his uncle Iroh, and then there was Zuko the Prince of the Fire Lord, and then there was a handful of some other characters. I was kind of questioning, like whether I was really gonna like these characters or how I was gonna accept them. And initially, it felt kind of like a sting for a minute, but then honestly, Sokka I found to be one of my favorite characters in this live action. I wasn't sure if they were gonna do him right. I felt like he was actually just done really well. I think one of the characters I just wasn't as happy with. I didn't really like the name Katara, like the one of the waterbender. I just felt like she just, I don't know. Like most of these characters in the story, they looked, they talked, and they acted, and they had the name, and everything about them felt like they were the real character. But at the same time, some of the chemistry and like maybe the acting just wasn't. It just wasn't quite what I was expecting for some of the characters, but some of the characters were also just like over the top good. So, I think like probably one of my least favorite characters was Katara. I don't know, because like I think in the anime she was arguably one of the best characters. I think because she was in the anime she was just like she was almost like a full-scale, like, almost like a social justice warrior, almost like just kind of over the top obnoxious. But it made her very likable in a sense because, again, she was just like very, very like outgoing, almost just borderline obnoxious at times, but not in like a bad way. But she felt like such an amazingly well-made character. But on this in this live action, she kind of just felt like she just wasn't. I mean, maybe it's just, the actors, the actresses, but some of the characters, they just didn't feel like. I mean, I don't know. It's subjective. Obviously, some people will probably be mad about my opinions, but it is what it is. I feel like in a lot of ways, like Sokka from the anime, he is just incredibly obnoxious and annoying, and he has really no purpose in the story other than being comic relief, and also he kind of just exists to be a character, and he helps kind of smooth everything along. But I feel like in the live action, or maybe in a lot of ways, it's almost like my disposition is kind of reversed. Because like I found Sokka to be like incredibly I just didn't like him that much in the anime, but I really liked him in the live action. And then like I think Katara, I didn't really like her that much in the live action, but I really liked her as a character in the in the anime. So it's kind of reversed in the sense. So yeah, I think those were kind of like some of my favorite. Like I actually think Sokka was my favorite character in this live action. I don't know. I mean, again, it can be subjective, right? And honestly, overall, I really like this. I really like this live action. So, okay. So, okay, I'm gonna go back to some of my notes, my scripts. Let's just go see what else I wrote down. And I can always add more too. I wrote down loyalty to friends, materialism plus detachment. So I guess these are just some themes throughout the series. And like, obviously you can look at some stuff from like a Christian point of view. You can just look at it from like a human, like a neutral, like more human point of view. I mean, like, loyalty to your friends. I think this is like a trope that's honestly been overdone so many times. But the whole idea of materialism and detachment. I'm probably gonna have to find another video for the background. I made this one today, but it's only like 23 minutes long. I like the way you die, human. So like again, obviously it has to do with some like Eastern, like maybe like Hinduism in a sense. And like my job as a person of the faith is not to come by and like persecute, hate, and attack other groups of people. I mean, I can show respect to other religions and other people. I mean, I don't believe they're technically true, but that doesn't mean that they're always false in every aspect either. They're just a different group of people with a different set of beliefs. And like, it's like, I mean, I can be respectful, and I can show honor and respect towards other people's beliefs, even if I believe they're not technically real, or they're bad in a sense. But it's, again, like, I don't have to persecute people either. It's not my job. But there's stuff like like a lot of Eastern religions, and again, I remember a lot of things from the anime, and they didn't do everything from the anime in the actual live action either. But again, as I would say, it's literally just almost a 1-for-1 from the anime to the live action. It's actually impressive. But there's a lot of themes about like again, like I guess like materialism plus detachment. It's like there's like you have like the Air Nation, and they believe in like they're kind of like monks. They even look kind of like monks. They wear like an orange outfit. They have like their staffs. They have like the air. It's all about being free and finding joy and being happy in life, and about kind of learning to let go of learning to let go of your materialistic life and all the stuff in it. And like basically a mentality of not worrying about stuff in life. And also the idea of detachment from like, your relationships and, even personal love interests. because these things hold you down and hold you back in life. Now, some of this stuff, I mean, it's okay. The live action, I don't know if they're gonna make more from it or not. I know that again, obviously this is going a little bit into spoiler territory. I think I'm gonna say at this point forward, there's gonna be spoilers, or there's either gonna be minor spoilers, or there's potentially gonna be major spoilers. So there's the people who are watching and listening. If you haven't actually watched this show, or you haven't watched the anime, and you don't want to risk the spoilers, at this point you probably want to stop. Maybe go to the ending, maybe just don't go to the rest of it all. Alright, so this is my spoiler warning, right? Now, to whoever's out there, I don't know how many people are even gonna watch this. But, okay. So, Aang has this love relationship with Sokka's sister, Katara. Now, obviously, a little bit of this is in the anime, and then some of this in the live action. I feel like they only went so far in the live action, but in order to get the point across, Aang has to learn to let go of his deep emotional attachment to Katara. Oh yeah, also, I mean, again, I feel like one thing I'm gonna say is I'm not gonna try to be patronistic. It's kind of a presumption that you probably understand at least some of the basics of what the series is. But there's the idea known as the Avatar, and Aang has mastery of all four of the elements. There's fire, water, earth, and air, and he can use all four. Although usually the Avatar starts out in one specific area and has a better understanding of one specific elemental technique. But in order for Avatar Aang to learn how to use his powers, he has to learn at one point. One of his masters, he teaches him to learn to let go of his relationship and his attachment to Katara, and Aang doesn't really want to do that. It's hard for him to understand, but that's one thing that he can do. Okay, so here's some footage, I think, from MTG Arena. Again, I'm not sure how loud this is going to be. I put it like 35% rather than I've had it at 50. I think it's just still too loud. I think I've turned the sound effects off. Well, some of the footage is older, but I have it at 35%, so hopefully the sound's at least a little bit better. But okay. So yeah, he has to learn to remove his detachment. And it's just, again, I guess let's go back to the idea of learning to grow up and mature. Having personal relationships with people of your friends or your family, or even of the opposite gender or sex. And this stuff is difficult to understand and rationalize. And to be honest, in Aang in the story, he's pretty young. Most of these characters are pretty young. They're kind of forced to grow up earlier. So there is that aspect. Okay, so I think, so I wrote down, I wrote 4 other aspects, and I have one more beyond that. Okay, so one aspect was, I mean, and some of these are from the Christian perspective too. They're kind of interwoven in. So I guess I already talked about the other aspects. I'll talk about this one. One's called the idea of reincarnation. So that theme is put in this series, but at the same time, to be honest, it's also not the Avatar: The Last Airbender is not based around reincarnation as a whole. What it's based off of is only the Avatar has reincarnation, from what I can tell. So the Avatar comes back as a brand new version, of him or herself over the course of thousands of years or something. But as far as I can tell, all the other characters in the story, they don't reincarnate. They just die, and then there's new people that come. So, and the Avatar is supposed to bring peace to the world or something. But yeah, reincarnation, obviously from a Christian point of view, we as Christians don't support the idea of reincarnation. We believe, in holiness, that God is the creator and He creates people, and He gives us life. And honestly, I don't think most of the stuff is never really that explained. But we have some kind of a soul, and we believe in the afterlife. But generally speaking, biblically, people, when they die, they don't come back. But they're not like reborn into some kind of a cycle. You just die, and then you're done. You never come back to this earth ever again. So that's kind of like the biblical point of view. And honestly, the biblical point of view, also the Christian point of view, are basically one and one the same. Like a little bit different way of saying it, but so yeah, like at least as the norm. Now, in holiness, God can do whatever He wants. He could bring in, he can defy the laws and the norms of reality. But generally speaking, humans, when they die, they just stay dead. They go to the afterlife, and then maybe brand new humans will come to this world, but they will be completely different than what they used to be before. They're not. You don't share the soul of someone else. You don't have someone else's spirit. Now, you might have to live with the consequences of other people who came before you, but you're not them. You're a brand new person. So like, there's a big difference between reincarnation, where like the idea of reincarnation is when someone would die, and 100 years from now, they're reborn into a new body with the memories of their souls intact. But that's not Christian. Now, it's hard to prove one way or the other of this stuff, but that's not the norm. It's not. You shouldn't support reincarnation. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna list off the other things I wrote down, and then I might go through them. So there's the whole notion of a family, father, I guess an arrow to son moments, or you could even say mother to daughter, or parent to child, or even siblings. They talk a lot about family. There was at times moments of mentioning of the idea of feminism, personal duty / lawful, I guess pride, and then becoming humbled because of your pride. And that moment, that kind of gets connected to the idea of feminism. I'll talk about that a little bit. There's powers. I wrote powers / sorcery, manipulating elements, and I think it's less to do with sorcery. It's more to do with the idea of manipulating the earth or manipulating the different elements. And one could argue that the definition of sorcery is the manipulation of energy. And to be honest, manipulating energy is the same thing as basically sorcery. But they're technically different terminologies, but they're kind of the same thing at the end of the day. It's like the textbook definition of sorcery. So they kind of are the same thing, but they're technically not necessarily. I don't know how far I need to go into this specific point, and I'm not sure what I would even fully classify avatars being. Again, it's at times it feels like it's having it's like superpowers or supernatural abilities, and other times at times it can feel like sorcery. At times it feels like you're manipulating certain elements. And again, another thing I will say about this is in this world, it's just a normal thing. It's not and I feel like if you play a video game like Dragon Age or something, and you see sorcery and Dragon Age, that stuff is generally very perverse and twisted and unholy and dark. And people see witches and stuff, and that stuff is really bad. But in The Last Airbender, it's the idea of bending elements in water, earth, air, or fire. And it feels like a normal, natural thing. And it's not deemed as perverse in the world. So I don't view it as sorcery necessarily. But it's not a normal, it's not a natural thing, but in their world, it is kind of a normal thing in their world. But again, I also would argue it's just fantasy. and it's just fictional, and it's all about just telling a story. And they're just kind of like props in a story. So it also talks a lot about personal duty and like the idea of like being like lawful, and you know, it's like it's always they're constantly messages about there's constantly messages about like, you know, like the reasons of why people are doing what they're doing, and like you have like, you know, you have Aang, and you have again, honestly, almost every one of the major characters, they have some kind of a personal like duty, or their honor, or their responsibility to their people, or towards their group, or towards themselves, or their family members, or their position they have, and they're trying to make sense of their personal like responsibility. And I think this is a great idea of like storytelling and characters, because well, I mean, again, like even the idea of like, again, like as goes back to the idea of like, you know, growing up and being a human, maturing, and learning your personal responsibility, and like having a responsibility that defines you as a person, and it helps you to have, you know, some kind of, it's like a foundational point, you know, that kind of like it's like your anchor to life. And learning to either accept your responsibility, or believing it's your responsibility, but then having to defy your responsibility for a higher purpose, which is a very difficult thing to understand and rationalize. And that's sometimes how you learn how to grow, is you go against your personal norms or values in order to do a higher reasoning. And that helps you to grow in a sense. Like, a character would believe that they shouldn't do certain things, or they should do things, or they shouldn't do things, but then they're put in an impossible situation, and they have to like save someone's life, and in this causes them like I shouldn't say like in holiness, even like biblically, right? Like God, in holiness, God puts a person through a trial and a test, and He challenges your belief, or why you believe what you believe, or why you don't believe something, and you learn the truth behind it, and then you can learn to accept it, so you can kind of move on. And you can a lot of characters in these stories. There's a lot of tribes and a lot of stuff. Like the tribal leader will tell them, you know, you shouldn't do something because this is our way of life, and like the character will believe that's the way of life. They don't really understand why that is necessarily, and then sometimes they're forced to break a norm, and then they understand why it is that they should or shouldn't do something. And this is something Avatar does a lot. And I'm not saying this isn't true for like every other series just like it. And obviously, I'm not saying breaking your norm is a good thing. Obviously, the norm is there for a reason. You know, it's like the natural law and the natural order exists for a reason, right? But a lot of people will never understand why that is. And this is something I think the series, and it talks about a lot. So, I mean, I don't know. I can go into all these sorts. There's tons of examples, but yeah, like, and obviously this stuff is kind of dangerous at the same time too. But again, yeah, you go through a trial and a test. And a lot of times, you understand why it is that you should or shouldn't do something. And then most of the time in this kind of a series, they go back and they're thankful and they're appreciative to learn why they shouldn't do something. And then usually they respect it and they honor it and they like put it back in a sense. And I don't know. I mean, I know there's a live action series. Now I'm sure there's tons of examples in this one. Like another good example from. I mean, I don't know. This is kind of a spoiler it's a completely different series. But another great example that's kind of based off of this, like a tribal example. I know there's like 10 examples from the live action, but the one that just kind of comes to my mind, so sometimes the gut reaction is the best reaction, though. It's from the movie called Mona, or Moana. You have this like little girl who's learning to become like an adult, and like her father tells and she's not allowed to leave the island, like Hawaii Island or something, or maybe it's like in the Philippines. It obviously it's a fantasy story, but it's kind of based off of real life. She's not allowed to leave the island, and then her father's like, you can't leave the island because it's dangerous out there, and she doesn't really understand why that is. But then she goes on her little trial and her little test and her little adventure, and then she learns, why it is that her dad doesn't want people to leave, because and he sets a standard for everybody, because obviously her father knew best, and she didn't know that any better, and she kind of learns why. Eventually, she grows and matures and gets through it. And she eventually comes back, and she appreciates. Usually you appreciate why a standard is, and you learn that somebody probably got hurt badly, or some terrible event happens, and then you come to terms with why it is that you should or shouldn't do something. And kind of like fulfill your lawful destiny. And obviously, in like The Last Airbender, that scenario happens like literally every single, it feels like almost every other episode. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's just one angle about it. I'm not exactly sure exactly fully where I was trying to go with that, but okay. One other thing I was gonna add. Again, like the reasons that when there's a standard that says you shouldn't break that standard, one of the reasons is because you can get hurt really badly. And if you get hurt really badly, obviously it's bad to get hurt. It's bad to suffering and death and pain and humiliation and these things. It causes you a lot of suffering. Or they cause you a lot of problems. And it cripples your ability to live your life. And usually a father figure, or maybe to be honest, at times, or even like a mother figure, it might in a sense sorry, I got a little distracted for a second trying to think what I was trying to say. I was trying to put the point. Yes, like the mother or the father figure will set up a norm, for their child or whatever, because they themselves have experienced this, or they know what the situation's probably going to be done to try to protect the child from a terrible event. It's like even the biblical idea is a biblical principle is that love protects, and like parents, they protect their children by giving them a standard. So there is this idea. And then I guess another theme, and then I guess going back to probably the other, some of these things are interwoven. So there's the whole idea of feminism. So Katara ends up at one point meeting she goes from I think it's the southern water tribe, I believe, to the northern water tribe, and she ends up she wants to learn water bending from the other tribe that she's not from, and the master of the water bending there, basically he believes that only men should be allowed to water bend for combat, and that a woman's role is to do healing, and that's your social standards of the world. And Katara is some fierce feminist, and she believes that women should be allowed to fight in combat with waterbending. And it's just this, it's even it teaches the idea of one's pride or one's hubris. Again, obviously Katara is young, and most of the characters in this world, they're all like somewhere between the ages of like maybe 12 years old to like 16 or 17. So most of these characters are pretty young. So she's trying again. She thinks that women should be allowed to, to fight in combat, and she tries to defy the societal expectations. And the master, he believes that that they should follow the norms of their society. So she's fighting against him in a sense. And then like the whole idea of like a person's ego or their pride. And a lot of times a person's pride leads them to becoming humbled severely. Honestly, even also a direct biblical teaching from scripture. The Lord Jesus Christ, he talks about those who humble themselves will be exalted, those who exalt themselves will be humbled. And there is this truth to this. And like, Katara is an example where she's fighting against her master or her societal norms that she knows. And she gets her ego kind of humbled and in check. She fights the water master and she loses. It hurts her ego a bit. And there's, because she's trying to, she wants to do what she wants to do, even though she's not technically supposed to do that. So okay, so yeah, and then Aang is trying to and even another example in this series, even in the same area, I think it's I can't keep track of which was there's a northern southern tribe and there's a southern water tribe. The technicalities, I can't remember which one they came from, which one they go to. It's either the north or the south. It's irrelevant though, and at the end of the day, but like when they go to that place later on in the series, Aang is speaking to one of his past avatars, and he's trying to, and he wants to, and it's like he doesn't want to do his role and fulfill his law or his destiny, and like his past avatar tells him that like he has to learn to like, he has to learn to rely on himself, because if he trusts in his friends, they're gonna suffer terribly, and it's gonna cause them harm. And like he doesn't want to accept that, and like his past avatar basically rebukes him. But he's a teacher, right? He rebukes him heavily, and is just like really angry with him. And just like all the other past avatars, they all tell him that he needs to learn to rely on himself more, and not trust in his friends. And they all rebuke him, and it humbles his ego a lot, because Aang is used to always being right and getting what he wants, but he wants to live free. And every time he speaks to one of his masters basically rebuke him heavily. And honestly, it is if you're looking from like a biblical Christian point of view, the Lord himself, he rebukes people. He rebuked people in the scriptures, and there's other masters and like senseis and different lords and whatnot. They would rebuke their students or different prophets or something, in holiness to God, the Lord God himself, right? And those who were his direct servants, and like the master positions, they would rebuke them, and they would tell them like, this is what you should do, and this is why you shouldn't do it. And then like people would refuse to understand, and they would have to rebuke them and discipline them. And even biblically, right? The Lord disciplines those whom he loves, and in a lot of ways that's a good thing. So there's a lot of idea of like, I guess that's the last of my notes, but it's like a partial script, I guess. A little bit like a template for a script. I guess it gives me some guidance or some guideline. Almost even what I was talking about, right? That's ironic. So Oh yeah, so I'll finish this last point here at least. So yeah, like the idea of like pride bringing you down, bringing you low, and a lot of times in this series you get brought low, and then you find a way to kind of be like it's like a cycle, right? Your pride leads you to disgrace, then your disgrace in holiness leads you to turn back to the Lord. You choose to humble yourself, then you're brought back up to being exalted. So it's like it's not just like you get kicked to the ground and then you're just done. A lot of times you have to learn to be humbled, and then that being humbled will bring you to becoming more humble yourself. And when you're humble, then you accept the aid or the help of your teacher, and then you learn to get past it, and then you ultimately you survive and you thrive from it. So which at the end of the day it isn't that good. Okay, so yeah, I guess those are just some hypothetical aspects. But yeah, I'd say overall from this series, I was pretty happy with it overall. And they'd have some like fan service or fiction in it. And I would say overall, I was pretty pleased with the series. And it felt very faithful. And maybe it wasn't a direct one for one every single scene, every single aspect, but it felt very close, and it felt very good. And they showed a lot of respect for the characters and the lore. There's a moment with like this guy called Boomy. I remember from the anime. Again, they changed it up a little bit. Obviously, you can't, and you have an 8-episode like live series from like an entire book. So I think like book 1 was like probably 30 episodes in the anime, and they had 8 episodes in live action. You can't take every single scene. They have to shorten certain characters and scenes, and they have to remove certain like fluff. But they kept the main important stuff. There was this character called Boomy, and like he fought against Aang. And Aang, and I know in the anime or the cartoon, Aang didn't know Boomy was Boomy until he got to like the very end. But in the live action, he learned that Boomy was Boomy, and early on, and they talked about the idea of like raw candy. So like anime was Aang was learning who Boomy was, and he was fighting against Boomy because he had to learn. And he was there to try to teach him a lesson. And initially, Boomy, because when Aang was frozen in the ice or whatever, he knew Boomy when he was a little child. But, and then Aang and Boomy fought, and he thought he lost the battle, but he ends up eating some of the raw candy or something. And he learned that it's candy, so he can just eat his way through it. And that's how he learned Boomy was Boomy. Kind of playing a trick on him, but he was teaching him a lesson at the same time. And ultimately in Boomy in the live action, he talked about how it was like raw candy, he's eating the candy from it. And Aang learned Boomy's identity early on. But truth be told, it was still very faithful in the same time. And I mean, you can overlook small faults when it's very faithful. And again, there were scenes where it felt so one-to-one from the actual the anime the anime itself was the adaptation in the live action, and there's just scenes where they felt like they just did a really good job trying to do the best they could, make it very, very similar. Obviously in the live action you can't do identical to the exact series, but you can make it very close, and they did a very close job. So this is something where I'd probably give them praise, right? So yeah, but yeah, I overall, I was pretty happy with it. I enjoyed my time. I probably, to be honest, would look forward to another, making another series, or start continuing on, with the next season or whatever. I mean, I don't know if they're working on another one or not. Supposedly they might be doing something. Oh yeah, and then again, some of the characters again, the Fire Lord. he felt like really, really well made. Like, he was a really good character being the villain, and he did an amazing like acting job. And again, some of these stuff, like the acting jobs and stuff, how good they act or not, that stuff is arguably pretty subjective. But I mean, like I really liked him as a character too, and yeah, like, you know, I had a good time, and it didn't have all that woke crap in it as far as I could tell. They didn't try to modernize it too much. They just stuck to the lore, and overall they did a good job. You know, that was a good thing, right? So there is some Christian themes you could talk about or see in it, and also at the end of the day, it is just great storytelling. It's like very clean, normal, just storytelling, different characters and different backgrounds and points of view. So there is that. Oh yeah, okay, so I guess like what I'll say is you know, let me know in the comments below if you got this far, what you thought about it, or what Christian points of view can you find from the live action or from the anime version of it. If you're gonna write spoilers, you know, try to marker spoilers, I guess, at least in the comments. Or if it's like a key moment in the story, right? If it's just some small nonsensical thing, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're gonna do a key spoiler in the comments, you know, at least mark that or something. As to not ruin it for everybody else. Yeah, let me know what your thoughts are down below. And yeah, I know this came out like probably a year ago, but I mean I'm doing it now, so it's just gonna be what it's gonna be, right? But yeah, again, one aspect is I had a good time. It was fun. It was just a good time, and I appreciate that. So yeah, thanks for watching. You know, I appreciate it. You know, I hope you can find like a good Christian point of view maybe on this. Oh yeah. One other thing I guess I'll say here towards the end, right? I guess like, you know, whether or not like, you know, a person of the faith should watch this or not or whatnot. So I would say my personal moral stance is that I'm not the moral authority. So there is that aspect. I would also, I mean, it's not really my place to tell other people what they can or can't do. But from like a discernment point of view, honestly speaking, I feel like this show is probably fine for a Christian to watch. It's obviously, you know, it has some aspects that are a little bit gray and a little bit sketchy. You know, it has like moments that, you know, with the reincarnation and with some sorcery maybe or something, but I feel like for the most part, it's a pretty clean series. If you just kind of detach yourself from the reality a little bit, and you just accept that they're just characters going through journeys and stories, you can learn a lot from it. And there is a lot of, you know, there's a lot of greatness to it. And there are Christian themes in it, even if they're not direct, like literal one for one. I personally would say that I do think that a Christian could watch this. Obviously, you keep, you know, your crap together. It's not really a dark anime or obviously in this case a live action. It's not really like a dark series per se. It's more of a neutral series, and at times it's probably more like a positive light series. So, but I mean, then again, like these questions are so difficult to understand. That's why I claim I'm not the moral authority, because like it's just so difficult to it's just something that in my life personally I find it to just be stressful. You know, telling people what they can or can't do, or even what they should or shouldn't do. I'm just gonna leave that to my betters or whatever. Like a full-scale minister can tell you whether you should or shouldn't or can or can't. I don't want to be that person myself, but I would say, I mean, you know, from if I, just from reasoning, I feel like it's fine. The show, it's just like a normal neutral show for the most part. You gotta be careful about some of the stuff. But other than that, it's a fun time. And I had a good time. So, but yeah, thanks for watching. God is good.